Welcome to the program. My name is Kevin Tocci, and I will be your host for the next nearly 30 minutes. Today, our conversation will focus on some of the great things that are going on in the Plymouth County Treasurer's Office. We'll talk about a couple of different things. We'll talk about the CARES Act. Do you know if your community applied for any funding? What is the CARES Act? Where did that funding come from? And what are some of the integral things that happen in the Treasurer's Office? Who would we speak to about that? Well, none other than the Plymouth County Treasurer, Tom O'Brien. Treasurer, welcome to the program.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. And I'm excited because, you know, the county treasurer's position is one of those things that people will scratch their head and say, I'm not exactly sure what the county treasurer does. And so you've given me a little bit of a forum here to talk about that, because it's amazing as I think about the scope of the job and the responsibilities that we touch a lot of lives here in Plymouth County, and we have some real impact. So I really appreciate you affording me the opportunity to let people know what the Plymouth County Treasurer does, what we've been up to, and really some of the things that have been happening recently. A lot of good news to report.
It's interesting that you say that, because we were living in the world of COVID-19, a global pandemic, and how we do things. It's not the norm. I mean, we're conducting our conversation virtually right now, and what's fantastic is that there have been things that have been going on. Plymouth County government has been in the news because, your department, you're part of Plymouth County government, actually sought out funding to be able to give back to the 27 municipalities, the one city and 26 towns, to help them navigate through, or at least kind of dampen the costs of COVID-19. Walk us through how it came to be that the county sought funding to be able to help out its membership.
No, what a great opportunity to let people know how their government is really working for them. As we know, this pandemic has really turned the world upside down and has impacted so many lives in such a difficult way, and impacted our communities, impacted our town employees, impacted our town resources. And the federal government has seen fit to pass some large relief packages beginning really at the end of February, early March, and going all the way through. The third package that they passed, commonly now called the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Relief and Economic Security Act, was passed on March 27th, signed into law. And that act envisions sending money back to cities, towns, counties, and states to provide relief for the expenses that those entities had to incur to deal with the pandemic. I mean, Kevin, we know firsthand, towns had to dedicate significant resources right away to buy PPE, buy face masks, get plexiglass separators, get hand sanitizers, things that weren't in the budget, things they had no expectation that they were going to have to pay for, items they didn't know they were going to need. And so many of them had a huge impact on the budget. So federal government said, let's pass the CARES Act, let's provide some relief for those costs. And that's what they did. Now, what's interesting is that they said, we want entities, governmental entities with a population more than 500,000 to have an opportunity to directly get some of those resources. And here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there are only 4 entities that qualify. And a lot of people don't know that, because 500,000, while we think it's a big number, doesn't really come to mind all that often. And so the entities that are well eligible were the City of Boston, Bristol County, Norfolk County, and Plymouth County. Those are the 4 entities in Massachusetts that have that population and were eligible to apply for various reasons, not the least of which is administering these resources comes with a lot of rules, comes with a lot of regulations, constraints. You can imagine when the federal government sends money, they tell you exactly how you're supposed to spend it. And what's been interesting, and we'll touch base on this in a second, they change the rules occasionally. So you really have to be on your toes. People didn't necessarily want to deal with that. But the city of Boston said, we do, and they took their money. And Plymouth County had conversations with the federal government and with the state government and said, well, this money is set aside for Plymouth County, a little more than $90 million. So we're not talking a small amount of money. If we don't take it to disseminate, to distribute, to disperse to our towns, will you guarantee, you the state, you the federal government, guarantee that 100% will be spent in those 27 communities? To their credit, they candidly admitted that they couldn't guarantee that, that they had other costs that were countrywide and statewide that needed to be covered, that they would spend as much of it as they could, but couldn't guarantee 100%. And the only way 100% could be guaranteed to be spent in these communities was if Plymouth County applied for and received those resources. So the commissioners really took a significant step to make sure that those monies came back. We filled out an application. We, the county commissioners, the chairman, Dare Pilata, Greg Hanley, Sandy Wright, and myself as the chief financial officer, we filled out an application on April 15th. On April 27th, we received a little more than $90 million. And I have been pleased and really thrilled with how quickly we've responded to that responsibility. The first thing we did was set up a dedicated website, PlymouthCountyCares.com, so that communities could see exactly where every dollar was going to go. And so that we could tell them what the rules were, both at the federal level and at the county level, so they could apply for these resources in a manner that made it most successful. And so that website went up a few days after. We received the money on a Friday. By Monday, that website was up and running. And it's been a great resource to our communities. And I'm also pleased to report that every single one of the 27 communities in Plymouth County has submitted a grant for some of those monies. Every single one. Think about that, Kevin. 100%. Not many other entities can say that. And so it's a real sign that we recognize the need, towns have this need, and we've been able to begin dispersing that money. In fact, a few weeks after we announced the program, our first submissions came in. The town of Marshfield, the town of Situate applied for monies, and a little bit more than a week later, we were bringing a check to their town hall to cover those costs. As I mentioned, and I want to touch base on this a little bit, because we're getting a lot of calls, and I get a lot of calls every day. This money has a very specific use. It has to be used for COVID expenses only that are incurred from March 1st until December 30th, and they cannot have been a previously budgeted item. And it had to be necessary as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. So our towns had a lot of questions. We posted a frequently asked questions component of our website. The federal government has been doing the same. We have to follow their rules. And where I mentioned they kept moving the goalposts on us is that they came out with a set of rules in April, and then they came out with an additional set of rules in May, and they came up with another set of rules at the end of May, and the most recent rules were issued on July 8th. So we've tried to be nimble and follow those rules and those guidance from the guidance that's issued from the federal government. And we serve as that resource for our cities and towns. Because imagine each of those 27 trying to figure this out on their own. Well, that's the job of the county. And so we're following those rules. We've got an application process for the town to submit to right on our website. And it's been a pretty thorough process, but a successful process as well.
It's worth noting that you said to do a couple of towns that were very, very quick out of the gate to apply for the grant funding. Did it seem like it was a slow process for some communities because they didn't want to get caught between two government entities over the funding? Because initially I know the state was like, well, we could distribute that. The county's like, well, we have the resources, the wherewithal to be able to do this. Did it seem like it was kind of slow for folks to act at first?
I'm not sure that was the reason. I think it's more that the towns that were ready had segregated all their costs from the beginning of the pandemic, which was very visionary of them, because there was no sense of a CARES Act at the beginning of March. But a number of these communities said, hey, we're hoping there'll be relief. We can't guarantee it, but we're hoping. And if there is, we want to be ready. And so I think it was much more that they were just more prepared. They had all their invoices segregated. It met the guidelines that were issued. They knew they wouldn't be submitting for things that weren't related to COVID. So I would say it was much more that they were more prepared. The other towns are going through the process, and these rules are not easy to interpret. I get now probably 20 to 30 calls a day with questions, very reasonable questions, and we return all the calls and say, yes, that's something that's eligible, that's something that's not. What we're finding, Kevin, and this is interesting, is while the towns desperately need these resources, they also need revenue replacement monies. They've lost a lot of revenue. There are challenges that they're facing, and these monies specifically cannot be used for revenue replacement. And so what we found, our towns are coming and saying, hey, can we cover these salary costs? Can we cover this expense that isn't covered under the CARES Act? And so unfortunately, our answer has to be, by law, no. The federal government is beginning to hear the message. You know that the U.S. House passed the HEROES Act. That went over to the Senate. That had revenue replacement monies for our cities and towns. I think that was an excellent piece of legislation. The Senate has their own version now called the HEALS Act. We're still waiting to see the details of that. If you suffer from insomnia, Kevin, read any of these 400-page pieces of legislation because it's tough to slog through. One of my advantages is I was privileged and honored to serve in the Massachusetts House of Representatives for 10 years. So I'm used to reading these long pieces of legislation. So I've gone through them. I think the HEALS Act isn't quite as comprehensive as the HEROES Act, but it does a few things. I'm concerned, though, that the federal government does not realize the very real significant revenue needs these cities and towns, not just in Massachusetts, not just in New England, but around the country have. And I have to hope the federal government figures this out and gets its act together and maybe learns something from the delegation here in Plymouth County, because we have Democrats and Republicans that work exceedingly well together, because we realize our job is to represent our constituency, individual people in our cities and towns. And so, particularly in a time like this. So I cannot say enough about the elected officials at the local level and at the state level here in Plymouth County. It has been a pleasure to work with them and to make sure we get these resources out to our cities and towns.
You know, it's interesting. You got to mention that, you know, you get a lot of you've been getting a lot of phone calls, 20 or 30 at a time sometimes. What are some of the other things that are important when it comes to your office, some of the duties that you've kind of had to expand what you do to be able to do the CARES Act funding and you know, distribute that? What are some of the other things, the other provisions that you provide to the communities or that you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, and again, I welcome the chance to have this conversation because, as I started and said, people just don't know the job of the county treasurer. Why necessarily should they? And maybe that's a compliment. If things are going well, the treasurer is doing his job. You know, I liken it to a umpire at a baseball game. You know, if they're not complaining of balls and strikes, the umpire is probably doing his job. And so people just don't know the scope of this job and the responsibility. And I'm very fortunate that the electorate in Plymouth County has seen fit to allow me to serve. And I think it's because I have the educational background, the legislative background, and the financial background. I served as a financial services representative for a Fortune 500 company for more than 6 years and got all my certifications to do that. As the county treasurer too, I continued my education and I am the only current county elected official that is a certified Mass municipal treasurer. I had to go to the school provided by the Mass Collectors Treasurers Association to get that certification. Because here's what the job entails. I'm the chief financial officer for Plymouth County, responsible for its budget, revenues and expenses. I have to work closely with the commissioners. They're the chief executive officers to prepare a budget. But what's unique about the county is that our legislative body is an advisory board. And the advisory board is made up of one member from each of the boards of selectmen or counselors in Plymouth County. So we have 27 members on our advisory board, all selectmen or counselors with a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. And so we have to present a budget to them, answer their questions, get their ideas. A lot of good ideas come from them. So managing the county, and people then ask, well, what does the county do? We run the Registry of Deeds, and we have a great Register of Deeds, John Buckley. I know you've had him on your show a number of times and have talked to him, but we maintain and manage 3 courthouses in Plymouth County. We have a fire control airplane. A lot of people don't know that. We administer a lot of financial programs to my office, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then one of the things that we do is try and respond to the needs of our communities. One idea that came out of the town of Norwell in conjunction with the town of Hanover was the question about dealing with tick-borne illness. Lyme disease was a real problem and a growing problem in the Plymouth County area, Barnstable County, Plymouth County. And they came to us and said, we can't afford to do this on our own. Is there something the county can do to help? And so the county commissioners worked with me to put into the budget a position, an entomologist, I call them a bug scientist or an insect scientist, to serve Plymouth County and to provide that resources to the schools, to the senior centers, to the health agents. We hired a young man, Blake Dinius, who graduated from Duxbury High School. So how keen and cool is that to have a Plymouth County resident and student come back and work for the county? And he's just such a great individual who helps educate all spectrums from senior citizens to school-age children. He's really remarkable. I've never met anybody who likes talking about insects as much as Blake Dinius. He was so excited one day, he came in, he found a particular type of beetle, and he said, Tom, look at this. And I tried to be excited, Kevin. I really tried, but he definitely was. So I do the finances for the county. In addition to that, however, and a very important part of the job is I serve as the treasurer and chairman of the Plymouth County Retirement Association. And between our active and inactive and disabled members, we have more than 11,000 members. Now, these are people that have served in our communities, and they are our policemen, our firefighters, the folks that work in general government, and this is their pension. And so I'm responsible for managing those resources. When I started as the treasurer a little more than 13 years ago, we had a little more than $500 million in assets under management. What I'm very pleased at is the work of our board, not just me, but the entire board, to grow these assets. And I'm pleased to report that at our last meeting earlier this week, we have more than $1 billion in assets under management. So over some very difficult financial times, we've had some very good success managing those monies on behalf of our pensioners. I should also note at this point that people sometimes don't know that our employees here in Massachusetts, anybody hired after April 1st, 1996, is paying for the full cost of their pension and more. So sometimes there are people in the private sector that say, well, why do public sector employees get this pension? And they don't realize that we take 11% of their salary out of their salary and put it into this defined benefit plan and this pension fund to make sure they have a pension when they retire. It's been very successful, and we're pleased with our accomplishments here in Plymouth County. I could talk about that for a long time because pensions have a lot of nuances, but I think your question is more, what else do I do? I was asked early on in my tenure to serve as the treasurer for one of the largest joint purchase health groups in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Mayflower Municipal Health Group. So I serve as the treasurer for that group. It's a joint purchase group that provides health insurance for more than 40 governmental entities. It's a $110 million a year enterprise. And we really pride ourselves, and I encourage people to go look at our website there, www.mmhg.org. We pride ourselves on providing excellent health insurance at a very reasonable cost. While the rest of the country was seeing 7, 8, 9, 10, 12% increases in their health insurance, and I'm sure you've heard those stories because you travel around, the Mayflower Municipal Health Group's increase last year was 2%. The year before that, 2%, and maybe 2.5%. So we've been able to contain costs, provide excellent insurance, and that's through the management of our steering committee, but the financial management that my office and my team brings to the table. We also provide the staff for the Mayflower Municipal Health Group, the county does, and I really want to give the 3 employees of the Mayflower Municipal Health Group a lot of credit. Sheila Avery, Kelly Morse Perez, Joyce Lewis, they work really hard to provide that service. And think about this. $110 million a year organization run by 3 people, 3 staff managing that program. And so we keep our costs lower than other joint purchase groups because we work harder, we work smarter, and provide a pretty good resource. And then, as if maybe that weren't enough, a few years ago, some selectmen at the advisory board came to a commissioners meeting and said, hey, we've got this new thing coming down the pike, other post-employment benefits, more commonly known as OPEB. And we don't have a lot of options about how to invest that, how to pay that liability down. What do we do? And so the commissioners looked at me and said, Tom, what do we do? How can we figure this out? So I used my team. We spent probably a year of research figuring out what a best alternative might be to the ones that existed. And I found out that out on the West Coast, they had come up with something called a public multi-employer trust. And so they got different levels of government together to invest and consolidate their resources, again, driving down the cost of management, driving down the cost of administration, and providing a better resource. And so I spent a number of months researching options. I was very fortunate to meet with and come across this organization called PARS, Public Agency Retirement Services. They were doing this program out in the West Coast. They're the largest one in the country. They'd already done all the work. They figured it out. They retained the services of a local law firm, Murphy, Hesse, Toomey, Lehane, to help create the program. They also brought to the table U.S. Bank. We like to call it the largest bank you've never heard of. It's the 5th largest bank in the country, the largest manager of OPEB assets in the country. And to think about this, they work for us now. And so on January 15, 2015, and notice, Kevin, I try to do things with dates I can remember. So 1/15/15 is a date I can remember. I presented this program to the commissioners, and they took another bold step and said, you know what, we're going to be the first entity to do this in New England. And they voted to create the Plymouth County OPEB Trust, PCOT, for governmental entities. And as we were creating it, and this was fascinating, at least to me, and it's a bit, I get excited about this stuff, and then I have to remember, well, maybe not everybody does, but the county of Bristol, the county of Norfolk, and the county of Barnstable came to me and said, hey, that's a great idea. Could you make sure when you create it, we can participate as well? So the commissioners created this program, and governmental entities in those 4 counties are also allowed to join. So we thought, it's been 5 years, we thought, we'd have 7 groups, maybe we'd have $5 to $8 million in assets under management. But Kevin, we just added our 28th group, and we have more than $23 million in assets under management. And our rates of return have been significant, and our costs, because of the expertise of U.S. Bank, are very low. We believe they're the lowest in New England. So I serve as the treasurer and the chairman of the finance committee for that entity. So that's what keeps me busy. Those are the items that I work on as a Plymouth County treasurer. And I really love what I do because I know that it benefits people either through their health insurance or through their retirement or through programs the county can adopt that can help individual communities deal with whatever challenge they're facing, or if the federal government comes up with a program that we can be a resource to administer that program.
You know, what's interesting is it seems like yesterday, but over a series of years, there were on and off again pushes to abolish county government, and then the part of the lip service was, well, there are other counties that have been abolished, and they're fine. As you stand here as a county official, how proud are you as to some of the things, some of the accomplishments? Because you throughout our conversation, you have beamed with a lot of the different things that are being provided to the county, whether it's the CARES Act, whether it's OPEB or health, a health group. How important do people realize how much work is done on the county level for its membership?
Yeah, Kevin, I don't think so, but partially because we don't really advertise ourselves very well. We're getting a little better at that. Yep. I think with the administration of the CARES Act, people will realize, oh, this is something they can do. And you maybe touched on it a little bit. I just can't believe how complimentary people have been to our administration of this program. I was just on the phone before this opportunity where somebody said, we were wondering how this would work out, but we are so glad the county took that $90 million and administering it because we're getting our money faster. We can see how it's done. We feel that locally we can get questions answered. So is it rewarding to see that regional services are working and that it's working here in Plymouth County? Absolutely. But it takes a team effort to do that, Kevin. And I have to give credit to our commissioners. We don't always agree. We represent different parties, but we have the same goal and the same purpose. And that's to serve the 27 communities of Plymouth County and provide them with the resources they need. And our local officials have begun to realize that we're a partner they can rely on now. And so as I look to the future, I think, and this is my opinion and my take on things, that regionalization really is the wave of the future. You and I were chatting a little bit earlier that as you travel around the rest of the country, counties are big entities and people know what county they live in. They know their county commissioners. They know their county treasurers. In fact, a fun little story, I had the chance to travel with some elected officials out to Arizona. And we were with, we ended up, the mayor of Boston was out there as well. And so I was with some state reps and some state senators here in Massachusetts, probably a lot more well-known than the county treasurer. But when we were in Arizona, they introduced themselves as reps and senators. But when I was introduced as the county treasurer, it was like, oh, we have a county treasurer here. It's wow, we have a dignitary. I'm thinking, boy, we don't get this reaction back in Massachusetts. And so really around the rest of the country, counties are a big deal. They're a big enterprise. And that's because you can effectuate economies of scale, provide more resources for less money. And I just think that's the trend. Will it happen quickly here? No. Should it? No. But as communities have challenges, economic and fiscal challenges in front of them, I think they're going to realize that regional programs are a good idea and the county is going to be here for them. And that's what's most rewarding. I look out, it's interesting because you mentioned there are 14 counties in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, 7 of them were abolished. I've talked to leaders, local leaders in a number of those. 3 of them have tried to recreate themselves because they're missing the benefits of the county. They don't have an enterprise that can hire an entomologist, run their registries of deeds, provide a fire control airplane, come up with innovative programs like Plymouth County OPEB Trust. And they desperately need that, particularly out in Western Massachusetts, where these small towns just can't provide all of these services on their own. So I think what's happening is Plymouth County is saying, boy, we're glad the county is here as a resource. You know, we've been here for more than 380 years. And I was in a conversation with Senate President Terry Murray, who said, you know what, they're going to be here for at least another 300 more. And we hope so. And we hope so because people need the services that we can provide.
Thomas, you get a couple of minutes left, and that gives you an opportunity to touch upon anything that we have overlooked to mention or reemphasize anything that we have talked about over the past 25 minutes.
Well, Kevin, your questions were probing. You got me talking about things that I'm excited about. I think we covered the gamut. The only thing I'll just close with is right now, and for those people watching, obviously the coronavirus, the pandemic, is first and foremost on all of our minds. We know that we still have a battle in front of us. We don't know how long that battle is going to be, but we know it's not over. And the thing that I would like to just close with and remind people about is the Plymouth County Cares program. Please, if you haven't had an opportunity to go check out that website, plymouthcountycares.com, look at the resources. Please feel free to contact the county. You can call me directly at 508-830-9130. Whether it's a question that you have, a resource you think we might be able to provide, we really want to be here to do that. Reminding people that the county has a role and a function to provide regional services to serve you. It's not to do anything but to make sure our communities have some resources that they might not be able to provide on their own, and we want to be there to help. So I guess maybe getting the county back in the mindset of people and letting them know that we're very proud to be Plymouth County and we're very proud to provide some of these resources and services.
Well, we thank you for joining us today to discuss many of these items, whether it's about the CARES Act or what it is that your office does and some of the great things that are happening. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about all these things. And if I haven't covered everything. I hope for the chance to do it again.
Sounds great. And we want to thank you, the viewer, for tuning in for a segment like this. Again, the idea is to better inform you, keep you up to date with some of the things that are happening. The good things doesn't always have to be negative or downtrodden. The idea is to keep you informed as to what's going on, whether it's the local people in the community or some of the officials who are doing great work. Thank you very much for tuning in.